if those areas are going to be the beneficiary of new infrastructure, they are worth an absolute look for future opportunity. Welcome to the Urban Property Investor. I'm your host, Sam Saggers, here to help you crack the code of real estate wealth. Today's show, a code cracker, we're going to dig into supply-induced demand. Yes. Does that sound like a microeconomic journey? Well, I tell you what, I'm going to help simplify it. We're going to dig into urban growth zones, places of renewal, and of course, greenfield communities whereby there is a lot of inducement to build a brand new home, often referred to as house and land packages. Do they make great investments? What kind of case studies prove that new communities can actually make money? Today, we're going to crack the code on all of the above. So welcome aboard team. And of course, if you're a regular, you know the rules. Play the show in double speed. But of course, if it's your first time tuning in, there are rules. You can go back in time when it comes to my podcast. Go check out some past episodes. They're all lessons on real estate. And of course, get used to my voice because then you can pay me in double speed. You can speed me up, because my podcasts tend to go for a long time, about an hour usually. And who has an hour in this day and age? Not many people. So learn to love my voice, and of course, then you can speed me up. But today we're going to dig into really some concepts around the idea of urban growth zones. And really, for a lot of property investors, one way to get into the market, to get a foot into the real estate community, is to consider the concept of building a home on a parcel of land, quite often in what is considered to be a growth zone corridor. And quite often these corridors are really designed around Australia's business plan, a huge population growth corridor. And of course, for that reason, they are ultimately zoned for more people and can, as a result, get quite good levels of capital growth. So I want to talk to you around the rationale and the theory behind the concept of what is an economic principle being supply-induced demand. But first, I've got a few shout-outs. And of course, when you shout out to me on the podcast and leave a review, I try to return the favor. And of course, I've had a couple of reviews late last year, which I never shouted out to, so I apologize. But Jazayes 74, thank you for the review. And of course, we have thanked Brave 555. Thank you for your review. So Jazzy, you're the latest reviewer. We've got the reviews up to 169, so that's good. I think the download episodes for the show are cracking almost 400,000. So, hey, thanks for everyone for tuning in. I appreciate your earballs, and it does not go unnoticed. But recently, I spent some time at really a Future Suburban conference, really trying to learn from really the people in the know, the policy makers, the planners behind Australian real estate. I got to talk to some pretty impressive people behind the scenes in Australian real estate. I got to hear from, for example, Adrian Schrinner, who's the Lord Mayor of Brisbane, around the concept of where and how Australia is likely to grow and how state governments and Lord Mayors are getting behind really creating better places for people to live. And of course, for a lot of planners, a lot of policymakers, the idea of Australia's business plan is a direct vertical for them. Now, remember, Australia has a plan. It has a very, very, very high growth population plan. By mid-century, it is really factored that Australia will have close to 40 million people. And when you think about it, that's absolutely a huge, fast rate of growth. In fact, most countries around the world are actually going through a declining population base, whereas Australia is really a high growth economy when it comes to its population base. So you can imagine we're at sort of 26 million people today, pushing closer to 27 million people. And of course, there will be another 13 million people added to the population over a really short period of time, If you think about, we're at sort of 26.5 million people today. It's taken 220 years to reach that milestone. It's only going to take really another, call it 27 years to add 50% more to that number, taking the Australian population to a possible forecast of 40 million people. Now, whether it comes in at 37 million or overshoots to 45 million, it's still a lot of people. And I always say this to property investors, you're blessed in Australia because really there is a free ride off the concept of a increasing population base. No matter what you do, there is going to be someone else added to the system. And of course, new taxpayers coming into the economy and people who ultimately do not bring shelter with them. They don't bring houses with them. And so they have to either rent one or buy one. And because of Australia's business plan, a lot of Australian property investors are absolutely going to be the beneficiary of that model. But people need to live somewhere. And for state governments, for Lord Mayors, they are inducing demand in certain places. And quite often these land and population corridors are where they want young families to grow. And of course, these areas are effectively zoned for growth, zoned for more people, zoned for more houses, and zoned for ultimately more demand. And of course, when I study land characteristics, there are really three versions when it comes to choosing land to build upon a house. There is infill. Infill land tends to be within sort of 15 odd kilometers to the CBD center, can be quite pricey. And of course, you generally need to build a little mansion, so to speak, if you're going to design an infill home on a vacant lot. The next land dynamic can be what I refer to as next fill. It's kind of a larger parcel of land, maybe can fit sort of 3,000 homes on it. It's not at the edge of the city. It's not a zone growth corridor for the state government, but it's well positioned. It's already close to existing efficient infrastructure and it just needs to fill out. And obviously, as land basically disappears, land prices generally go up. And of course, the final version of land is often referred to as greenfield, basically new communities which don't have typically a past history as residential home communities. They're brand new. And of course, greenfield communities are kind of misunderstood by a lot of people. I even hear, I guess, a lot of property people talking about greenfield communities as, no-go zones. But actually, one thing that potentially they're missing when they do their analysis of greenfield communities is a concept known as supply-induced demand. And effectively what that is telling us is supply will go to those places, those greenfield communities, but the government is going to make sure demand matches supply. And there is a lot of evidence that house and land communities have done very, very well of late. Prices have absolutely pushed further and further up. And when I study trends of greenfield communities, I typically find capital growth rates which are quite impressive. And of course, not all land is created equal, and there are certainly pockets which are in the outer edge of our cities which would not make great housing places to own real estate. But there are absolutely growth corridors, and there are master plan communities and communities forming which are designed around family, designed around jobs, designed around lifestyle, and as such are going to actually create capital growth for property investors into the future. Now remember, Australia's business plan is built around migration. It is fair to say migration is one of the puzzles that absolutely splits Australian society down the middle. A lot of virtue signalling is quite often labelled at we don't want to grow the population base here in Australia. More migrants just push the value of properties up. But the problem Australia has is its economy is really built around a couple of engines. And of course, one of those engines is education, construction, and finance. And really, I call this the fire economy, finance, real estate, and insurance. And what happens is around 25% of our GDP growth is through those sectors. So fundamentally, pretty well everyone's job is connected in one way to the big rock, which is finance, real estate, and insurance. Whether you're selling some retail things through, I don't know, JB Hi-Fi or whatever it is, it's usually to buy something for the household sector. People who sell furniture, it's connected to basically real estate. Plumbers connected to real estate. Real estate people connected to real estate. Finance connected to real estate. So Australia really principal mission is to increase its population base and eventually innovate new industries. But along the way, it needs to really provide, new houses to new Australians because they're not bringing them with them. And catching up with the Lord Mayor of Brisbane, I thought it was a great day, and he really imparted some knowledge on me. His words of wisdom were, think like a new immigrant. Don't think like a 5-generation Australian, which I am. Think like a stepping stone buyer. Don't think like a wise old property investor. Don't look down, look up, because Australia's funnel, if you like, begins with people basically looking at Australia like it is a very, very blessed place. And think about real estate now from really the lens of a new person coming to Australia who, after they get their residency, within 5 years or so will be buying real estate. Think like a first home buyer who has saved their pennies and wants to get into the real estate market and start a family. Think about what they need. And if you think about what they need, ultimately it comes back to a very good community and a very good affordable property. And as such, really, the Lord Mayor of Brisbane kind of really left a great piece of information in my mind that really sometimes as property investors, and certainly I've been guilty of this in the past, you kind of are drawn to the alpha marketplaces, the blue chip, very, very high caliber, character, heritage marketplaces. But for most Australians, those places are just completely out of reach. And of course, for a lot of new Australians coming into the economy, it's about where are the new communities where they can actually leave their mark on Australia, not necessarily coming to old established marketplaces. So Australia's going to grow rapidly, and it's going to be with new people. And new people don't necessarily have a prejudice or a bias to effectively different pockets of our cities. They see everything as an opportunity. So think through the lens of a new immigrant. And to me, that was something which really sparked today's episode. Now, if you look at really the cost to deliver new real estate to the Australian housing market, really when it comes to new builds and the volumes of new builds being created, there is around 35% of homes which can be built today sub $750,000 in Australian real estate. So the area where you can buy some land and still build a nice home, but do it under $750,000. It's around 35% of the marketplace today. You can still achieve that. And so for a first home buyer, for a new Australian, that's a nice number. And again, for a lot of people who perhaps commentate on the real estate market, they're probably comparing the wrong data set when it comes to how to analyze brand new communities. They're sort of comparing a $2 million suburb with a $750,000 suburb. It's not really comparable. So I want to teach you guys how to create that comparable data set and how to really consider certain suburb archetypes so that you can compare the right product to the right product and see if growth zone areas are really right for you. But really, when it comes to the idea of these greenfield master plan communities, it is really zeroing in on where future demand is going to go. Remember, supply-induced demand. Really, government's involved in really inducing people to fill up these areas, and they will induce the marketplace with all sorts of things. And when you think about the concept, which I've taught many times here on this podcast, there is a concept in real estate called free riding. How does free riding work? Well, it's quite simple. When there's new train stations built, new infrastructure created, new parks that are created, new job centers that are created, anyone who owns real estate around those creations gets a free ride because effectively only a few people benefit from the free riding concept. In other words, there's 26.5 million people in Australia today. If there's a new train station put in one suburb, it's usually paid by the taxpayer, but only the people of that suburb get the beneficiary of using that train station. Ultimately, they get the free ride, which by virtue of free riding is quite often an uptick on the value of their real estate, near, obviously, the free ride of new infrastructure. So there are a lot of heat maps that you can get your hands on when it comes to future growth corridors. They are population growth corridors. They are where Australia is going to grow to a 40 million person place. And really, we don't have to necessarily overthink this stuff. Like at the end of the day, that's Australia's plan. And of course, if those areas are going to be the beneficiary of new infrastructure, they are worth an absolute look. for future opportunity. Now, I teach a plan. It's a 4X growth plan. It's a model of growth that if you can buy well, doing a deal, you're going to make some money. If you choose a good location, you're going to make some money. If you choose the right market, you'll make some money eventually. And if you've got the right emotional factors behind what you buy, one day someone's going to come along and see some benefits to the real estate that you own. And of course, that will create growth. Now, in my 4X growth plan, I have different types of marketplaces. Emerging marketplaces are generally those ugly duckling suburbs closer to the city. They're emerging as the next little hot pick when it comes to transformation. They can be areas going through urban rebirth, little ugly duckling suburbs. They can be places which people want to inject capital in and get a multiplier effect of a result. Lots of renewal. And quite often they really tend to be old established neighborhoods which are going through change. I teach that there are some great NIMBY suburbs where you can own real estate in. They're tightly held. The real estate market is undoubtedly in the favor of the seller. And once you become the seller, you ultimately become in charge of a very tightly held supplied area. I think they're fantastic markets to own real estate in. I also teach monopoly-based marketplaces, that areas run out of land and ultimately when land runs out, prices go up. And there are some areas where you can get the monopoly-based effect of effectively a lockout, and you will see those neighborhoods go up in value. And of course, for urban growth zone areas, for those areas zoned for growth in greenfield communities, I also have them in my 4X growth plan. And really, I've always had them in there for the affordable sector of the investment community. People do have limited budgets. Not everyone can buy in a NIMBY suburb with a character home. It's just not possible for everyone to have the same maths. Property investment is not an even race. We don't all start with the same budget, the same age. We don't all start at the same sector of the property cycle. And so I've always had really the idea of innovative competitive marketplaces, the idea that master plan communities can create capital growth because of the economic principle, supply-induced demand. Where is the inducement going to happen? Where supply is created, but demand will automatically come. And again, for a lot of people that commentate on property, they probably don't comprehend supply-induced demand or haven't researched it well enough really to comprehend it. And I'll give you some great evidence around how it does actually work. And of course, there are some economic myths in Australian real estate. The first one is household income is basically weaker the further you go out. Household income is a bit of a snake. And if you think of a wavy snake, there are drops in household income as close to the city as 17 kilometers. Then there's rises in household income, 32 kilometers out. Then there's drops, then there rises. And what that really tells us is the marketplace is very different suburb to suburb. And of course, if you look into social economic issues, CEFA index, you'll notice that certain areas are really, downtrodden, and they can be 15 kilometers to the city, or they could be 35 kilometers to the city. Again, another big wavy snake when it comes to ultimately how it looks on a graph. Median house price, of course, is a bit of a different story. Obviously, the closer to the city you are, you generally get a much higher house price. as you travel further out, prices do tend to drop away. But again, you can have high house prices, a little bit like a snake, 30 kilometers from the city, 40 kilometers from the city. In fact, some house prices are more in outer areas than they are, say, in middle areas. So it can be very stratified as to how properties work. And this really is just teaching us that it's not linear. Property investment is not a linear concept. You need to go suburb by suburb, street by street. Property investment is actually very, very niche. And of course, when it comes to livability, it is fair to say the nicer suburbs closer to the city are the most livable, but ultimately the most unaffordable. And again, livability is quite even as soon as you get circa about 20 kilometers out of the city. It is not less livable to live 40 kilometers or 20 kilometers. It's fairly well pretty comparable. Obviously, if you're living, on the coastline next to the beach, your livability index is a lot higher. But again, what people do want and why people move in real estate is generally to do with lifestyle. Where can I get a better lifestyle? And so when we analyze some economic myths in real estate and lifestyle conversations, we can put two and two together. Really, this forms the basis quite often of greenfield communities, which are lifestyle-led. So in real estate, I teach a principle around really the ecosphere of real estate. And one principle I teach is there are 7 suburban archetypes. Now, probably the number one archetype, and if you can afford it, you should do it, is very heritage suburbs. I think, heritage homes in a heritage suburb, they're not making any more of them. And you can make a bucket load of money by buying into those neighborhoods. Places like Paddington, Sydney, Balmain, Sydney, Hunters Hill, Sydney, Toorak, East Melbourne, Paddington, Brisbane. I mean, these are just exceptional, old, been trading for 200 years plus areas. And again, I've got a friend buying in Paddington at the moment. He's looking to drop about 5 mil. Now, for a lot of people, who has 5 mil? The average property investor doesn't have 5 mil. The average property investor is just a hardworking Aussie that is looking to get ahead and make a few bob for their retirement. And I would say almost most property investors are really doing this for a savings kind of approach and, just ultimately priced out of certain archetypes when it comes to suburbs. The next archetype, I think, for a lot of property investors is the archetype of character suburbia. Now, character suburbia, beautiful character homes, tree-lined streets. You're probably in most cities today anywhere from late 1 millions to 3.5 million for a beautiful character home in a beautiful character suburb. Again, if you can afford it, I'm a big fan of getting involved in that space because the rate of growth is huge. It can be great in those marketplaces. Aspirational suburbs is the next archetype. And I think for a lot of property investors, if they've got more than $1 million, you can get involved in aspirational suburbia. Aspirational suburbia is just really where a lot of people aspire to live, and really they pay over $1 million to get homes in those neighborhoods. Make absolutely formidable property places to own real estate. But again, a lot of Australians just simply, as property investors, are certainly priced out of those areas. But from the 7 suburban archetypes, being heritage, character, aspirational, there are really 3 which I think make great property investments. They are those aspirational suburbs. They are established functional suburbs. They are functional suburbs are suburbs which work. They're infrastructure rich. There is no or little crime. They're still affordable. They're not in urban decay. They make great property investments as suburbs. The fifth one is what I think for a lot of property investors they consider, which is future and renewal suburbia. In other words, suburbs going through renovation through renewal, or suburbs going through rapid change and growth through zoning, and quite often those greenfield community places. The sixth and seventh suburb archetype is broken suburbia. Why is an area broken? It's just unloved. And really what happens is the local government can't basically improve it. There's a lot of graffiti, and local government can't get rid of the graffiti because then new graffiti comes. There's this spiral of urban decay, and really broken suburbs quite often can't improve because people do not see the point in renovating. And then there's those disadvantaged suburbs, which are really quite often just areas where there is a low socioeconomic disadvantage, just unable to keep up with the rat race marketplace. So there's definitely two suburban archetypes I coach people that I talk to just avoid. Really, there are 5 archetypes where, depending on your budget, you should invest. And they are heritage, character, aspirational, established, functional, and future renewal. And so today we're zeroing in on that future and renewal suburban conversation, really ticking over to future suburbia. Where and how do you make money out of greenfield communities? Now, again, for a lot of greenfield suburban places, they need to be the better ones to get the uplift effect of change and transformation. They need to be the places that people want to get into. There are plenty of cow paddocks on the edge of the city that make terrible investments. That's certainly not what I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about is the formation of brilliant communities, and really quite often what I see is commentary whereby people will compare a character suburb to a house and land suburb. Really, it's the wrong data set you're actually comparing. Really, what you need to do when you look through the lens of a first homeowner, or you look through the lens of a new immigrant, is go, do they want to buy in broken suburbia, which could be 20 kilometers to the city, or would they prefer to go 35 kilometers from the city and go into a new community? And so really the data set needs to be compared to really what's in their price bracket. And then you can see the inducement of demand. Demand follows where there is better lifestyle, and ultimately you see a higher rate of capital growth. Again, I could easily say Paddington is a much better place to invest than a greenfield community. It absolutely is, but it's a bit of a moot point because no one can afford Paddington. However, people can afford disadvantaged suburbs, people can afford broken suburbs, and they can afford future suburbs. Now, I'm just a believer that if your budget is constrained, future and renewal suburbs are really probably a better playbook than jumping out to an area where just to buy secondhand, you're going to end up putting your money into a very rundown, broken community just to avoid the cost of building new real estate. So let's have a little bit of a game here. Let's do a bit of a case study. Let's examine some history when it comes to real estate. So today I wanted to go to what I would refer to as a bit of a broken suburb. The suburb is Seven Hills in Sydney. Seven Hills is a place whereby traditionally it's got a bit of a stigma. It's not the greatest place going around. There's some social housing in that area. There's some housing commission. There's some good streets. There's some less impressive streets. There is a level of really just a broken neighborhood. Some bits are good, some bits aren't. Now, if you're from Seven Hills, you're probably mortified with me saying that, but ultimately, Seven Hills is a classic example. It's a little bit up and down, right? As a older area inside of Sydney. Now, Sydney is an interesting macro study because Sydney obviously has the CBD, but Sydney has a second CBD, which is quite huge as an economy. It's called Parramatta, and Parramatta has really a CBD which has been referenced to be bigger than, for example, Adelaide CBD. So it's a big economy. There is even today skyscrapers in Parramatta CBD. So it's really, Sydney has two major central business district hubs, Sydney Central and Parramatta Central. Seven Hills to Parramatta is fairly close. It's not far away at all. It's 15 minutes away from Parramatta, 20 minutes away, depending on traffic. From Sydney itself, you're probably 40 minutes, 45 minutes to Seven Hills. Seven Hills is an old, broken suburb here in Sydney, and for a lot of property investors, price-wise, it may tick the box. I'm going to go back in time though. In 2018, you could buy a home in Seven Hills. It had a median house price in November 2018 of $751,000. Now, at the same time, in 2018, you could have gone to Gables. Gables is really quite on the edge of Sydney. It is on the edge of the urban edge of Sydney, but it is zoned for growth as part of a greenfield instrument where the government will induce demand to match supply of that area. And so town planning wise, it's kind of more favorable. It is a future suburban area, not a broken suburban area. See how I'm comparing the two data sets side by side. I'm not involving Paddington, which is a beautiful heritage suburb. It's not my, it's the wrong data set. So if you're a new Australian, you are going, well, do I really want to move to Seven Hills, which is a bit of a dump? It's got a few gopniks running around. It's a bit of graffiti. Or do I go further out and find a brand new community of which I can be part of and live a more functional, futuristic, and community-led lifestyle? So the Gables, for anyone who wants to know by distance, is 58 kilometres from the centre of Sydney. It's 1 hour and 6 minutes. Seven Hills is 21.8 kilometres from the Gables, and it's closer to Parramatta, which is about 25 kilometres, 30 kilometres from the centre of Sydney. So Seven Hills is definitely a much closer location to both the two big CBDs of Sydney, being Parramatta and Sydney Central, much closer. But as I alluded to, it's an economic myth to say something is closer to our economic CBDs, and it attracts wealthier people. Certainly not an economic myth to go 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers from the city. That's a fact. But as soon as you leave that enclave of wealth, it's it's spread out, suburb by suburb transformation, suburb by suburb dealings. And so, for example, you could go to Castle Hill, very wealthy area, 30 kilometers from the city. Seven Hills, 30 kilometers from the city, not a very wealthy area. So again, it's a game of local investment, niche investing. So the Gables in 2018, you could have bought a block of land for $599,000. Obviously, at the time, to build a home, you could have spent anywhere from $350,000 to $400,000 to build a nice big home. This was pre-COVID and pre-cost push. So you could have absolutely got yourself a cracking home for under $1 million. So as a new Australian or a future or a first home buyer, you have a choice. You can go and buy a rundown home in Seven Hills in 2018, in November 2018 for $751,000, or you could spend just under $1 million on a brand new home, but further out in a future suburban community at the time. And they were your choices if you had a budget below $1 million. Now, a lot of people listening would probably go, well, $750,000 sounds better than just under $1 million. $750,000 gets me a closer proximity base to both of Sydney's CBDs. That is true. However, if we fast forward to today, what are the two value propositions of the both neighborhoods? So let's go to Seven Hills, which is broken suburbia. Some streets are nice, some streets are awful. You drive through the streets, noisy, there could be a lot of traffic. You turn down one street, you see 3 shopping trolleys pushed over. That's the vibe, right? That's the vibe. So obviously it's well documented. We've seen some price movement over the last couple of years since COVID. So Seven Hills, when I took this sample of its price, which was just 6 weeks ago, the current median value was $1 million. $1 million. So Seven Hills has gone up, call it $250,000 based on the average or median price, the median price, not the average, the median price. The Gables, which was the future community, has gone from you could buy for $1 million or just under $1 million, $950,000, has gone to $1,590,000. So when we compare the two side by side, future suburbia, the greenfield community, absolutely smashes from a capital growth value proposition the dysfunctional broken suburb. In fact, the capital growth rate is 67% over that period of time to 33%. Rental growth, 28% compared to 18%. Median price, 1.590 to 1 million. Rent, 720 to 520. Median household income, more affluent people are attracted to the greenfield community. Median household income, 3192 as opposed to 2361. Tertiary qualification, bachelor degree and above in the Gables, bachelor degree and above in Seven Hills. Professional mix of neighborhood, 31% to the Gables, 29% to Seven Hills. So we can see that the professionals are pouring into these new communities. And again, you've got to have a lens of a first homeowner wanting a nice, safe community and a brand new Australian wanting a nice, safe community. And of course, if you look at an image of a home in the Gables, you will see a beautiful brand new home. If you look at an image of a home in Seven Hills, you will see something rather itchy, something that really needs capital improvement costs. So even when you do the maths on that 750 back in 2018, you probably need to factor in $150,000 to $200,000 renovation. So the gain that was made, the $250,000 gain between 750 to 1 million, really you would need to respend that on the real estate to keep its life cycle going, to basically prop it up to hold it for the next 40 years. So was there a gain? Arguably, no, there wasn't. Was there a gain on the new home? $590,000. Does it need any money recycled back into the deal to keep the real estate afloat? No, it doesn't. So a true gain versus a paper gain with a need for a renovation, I know where I would be putting my money. Now, there is a point to this conversation. The point is people who have a budget of a certain price point will prefer to live in a new suburb than a broken suburb. In the experiment I just used, people will pay $590,000 not to live in Seven Hills. $590,000 more not to live in Seven Hills. The consensus is built into the price. This is the point of the conversation. Now, as an investor, I like the fact that I can go to an early stage place and pay less and watch it gentrify, just as the Gables gentrified between 2018 and 2024, which was quite a quick gentrification story. And again, the earlier you buy, the more upside you have through a cycle of gentrification. The Gables and Seven Hills also leads to a big real estate question. Do new communities gentrify faster than equivalent older communities, new versus old? So it's an astonishing question that really this stemmed from the conversation with the Lord Mayor of Brisbane. And actually, the more I dig into it, evidence-wise, absolutely, new housing communities, the right ones, absolutely create a faster rate of growth. And again, the reason being is broken suburbia has gentrification house by house. Houses need to be renovated for really the gentrification story to unfold. Now, if you go to aspirational suburbia and character suburbia and heritage suburbia, you see house by house renovations unfolding at a rapid rate of knots. The speed of change is actually so good that prices rise in those areas. Certainly, I live in a very character suburb, and mate, there's just tradies everywhere all over the suburb improving the look and feel of the suburbs housing stock, which is great. And ultimately, those areas get an uplift of growth because people reinvest into the street appeal of their neighborhood through better housing facades, through better renovation, better looking homes, knockdown rebuilds, all these kind of things. But when you go to broken suburbia, which is really the right data set to compare, the incremental house by house renovation is not unfolding. In other words, you buy a broken home as an investment, your neighbor isn't improving their investment. They let it rot. And so you get this slow rate of growth and slower rate of change because of the neighborhood character flaws and because everyone who owns real estate in those neighborhoods can't afford to renovate. And so what happens is you get this stigma effect sticking on the one-off house-by-house renovation broken suburbs. However, when it comes to future suburbia, it's a bit different. And it's probably fair to say, if I mention the word Seven Hills to a Sydney person, there would still be a broken neighbourhood stigma. Even though the price has gone up $250,000 over the last 6 years, it's a long way from an aspirational place to live. However, in new build communities, you get a completely different rate of gentrification. It happens a lot faster. So you get rapid transformation because not one house is being renovated and then you're waiting for someone else to renovate, which does happen quicker in character suburbs and heritage suburbs, but it doesn't happen quicker when you compare it to broken neighborhoods. Hence why I call them broken neighborhoods. They're bitsy. They're not getting rapid transformation. They're not getting full renovation. They're not getting renewal. However, the right master plan community absolutely gets rapid transformation. New houses get built quickly, new land estates get released and absorbed, and everyone's building high covenant brand new homes. And because of really the idea of supply-induced demand, they also are getting the free ride effect of large-scale economic investment. And so because it is all mapped and planned, you're getting the planning benefit of not a neighborhood with character flaws, but a neighborhood with character gains. And again, people are choosing to live in these communities, and as such, there is demand for them. And again, if I was to examine Gables, it started really as a future area of land and renewal and renovation and new homes and new streets and new schools and new transport links and new shops. And the price has risen from really sub 1 million to 1,590,000. That tells me the gentrification rate is faster. Arguably today, the Gables is gone from future and renewal suburbia to now functional, even aspirational suburbia. It has climbed the ladder of gentrification, and the suburb has gone up in its ranking through the 7 suburban archetypes. Remember, number 1, rank, heritage. Number 2, character. Number 3, aspirational. Number 4, established, functional. Number 5, future and renewal suburbia. Number 6, broken suburbia. Number 7, disadvantaged suburbia. The Gables has gone from future and renewable suburbia to arguably go up 2 positions to even today being very aspirational for people wanting to own real estate there. And again, quite often we have this sort of notion that there is some sort of evil at play when it comes to new communities. I'm here to tell you there is evidence to show that that is not the case at all. And of course, really, if I was to summarize it, whilst one-off house-by-house renovations in broken suburbia may lead to gentrification through a gradual process, the process ultimately is going to be too long for a lot of property investors. Whereas when you have the right future suburban framework and you've got induced-led demand, you ultimately are getting house-proud neighbours come to these areas and a faster transformation rate and ultimately a faster rate of growth. So it is really about assessing real estate communities and seeing where the gentrification will unfold. And when it comes to who is buying in these communities, really you're getting you're getting people, highly skilled professionals, highly skilled new immigrants, young first homeowner Australians, and really well-educated people. And really one of the reasons why is they don't have to put up with an itchy old home in broken suburbia with dodgy neighbors. They can custom home a brand new design. They can access new technologies in those neighborhoods. They can access new transport links. They can be part of a new community. And really, it's fair to say new communities don't have a dominant culture within. Now, if you look at life through the lens of a new Australian, there are plenty of places which are dominant when it comes to the type of people that live there. I live on the northern beaches of Sydney. There is a very, very Anglo-dominant culture here, which is connected to the surf communities. And again, for a lot of new Australians, they don't feel ultimately that that's a place for assimilation. They look at some of the new communities that lack a dominant person or profile within them as the better option. They can start from scratch. It's a rebirth of their life. And they're not broke people. They're just ultimately new people, highly skilled professionals drifting into those neighborhoods, meeting other brand new people. The other brand new people are typically also new immigrants, or the other brand new people are really first home buyers, really, creating a beautiful life for themselves. So they don't have a pre-existing cognitive bias. And of course, for us fifth generation Australians, sometimes we carry a cognitive bias, which ultimately for a lot of people can be a bit of a peak of Mount Stupid because you don't realize what is happening. And for a lot of people, they are just not seeing what is happening. So think like a new immigrant if you are considering brand new growth corridors. Think like a young Australian. Don't look down, look up. And you might find yourself a very good investment. Because when you think about it, the big providers out there, the Stocklands, the Lend-Leases, the Frasers, they want house-proud streets. You want house-proud streets. They want nice homes covenanted throughout their neighborhood. You want that. They want a community to form that is highly professionalized. You want that. They want local jobs, 1 in 3, to be within 15 to 20 minutes of their neighborhood. You want that. They want prices to rise. You want that. They want land values to increase. You want that. They want respectful owners in their communities. You want that. And again, like when you think about it, that is almost a safer engineering model and induced demand, supply induced demand. It's an economic principle that if that is what the supply is being created for, and that is what demand is going to match supply, that is a beautiful science. And again, for a lot of property investors, they don't know if the street is going to end up house proud. They don't know if the street will go through renovation. They don't know if the community in the street is formed and happy and working together. They don't know if there's professionals targeted for their street. They don't know if people leave the neighborhood and have to go and find jobs elsewhere. There's no plan for house price growth other than hoping there's a boom. There's no plan for land prices to increase unless there's some sort of macroeconomic condition affecting the entire market. They don't know if their neighbors are respectful or there's good tenants at the end of the street. And of course, this is the argument that the dysfunctional and broken suburbia, in my opinion, are less impressive places to invest than future and renewal suburbia. Of course, if you can afford a character suburb at 1.7 million, knock your socks off. It's a great place to invest because your neighbors are renovating. They're doing improvements. They're improving the design of the street. I've had in my street, and I live on a sort of horseshoe, my God, every second house is gone up so much because of this character effect. Let's improve the neighborhood. Let's invest in the neighborhood. When there's disinvestment in a neighborhood, that is not a good thing. One way to avoid disinvestment is to invest in a modern neighborhood because it is all being renovated. It's all popping, which is what you want. All right, folks, that's it from me today. Thanks for tuning in. As I said, it's an hour. It's another hour gone. You should have played it in double speed. All right, folks, thanks for tuning in. I hope you liked the show. Please leave a review. Love your work. Got to go. Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Property Investor. To never miss an episode, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite app or on YouTube. I would love it if you could give the show a rating and share it with your friends and family. In between episodes, you can always keep in touch with me by connecting on social media over Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Until we meet again on the next episode of the Urban Property Investor, take care and bye for now.